How's everybody doing tonight? Give me one in the chat if you can hear me. Give me one in the chat if you can hear me. Up there it is. Shout out to Jupiter, Justin Williams, Jeffrey. Shout out to my man on LinkedIn, Landon Anderson, Jim R, Nathan. Shout out to B Dubs. Just left her stream. She did a great CISP study session. I need to get my studying on. Appreciate you on LinkedIn. So we're gonna keep something short. Let's see. I don't think I'm gonna drop the link early. If anybody wants to come up, I know Chris said he had some specific questions for me, so I'll drop the link. If anybody want to come up, you can come up. I am running on fumes. I did a lunch and learn with Dr. Ozier that went pretty well, so I don't know. It kind of wore me out. So once again, you saw it. I'm going to talk a little bit about AWS and NIST 800-53 compliance. Shout out to Chris. Shout out to BB Dubs. Shout out to Prince. Yep, I dropped the link if you want to come up. You said you had some questions. I don't know if you were serious or in jest when we were in CISP study session. So definitely check that out. Nah, man. If I drink a monster, I'm gonna be up all night, man. So I drank a little pop earlier, which I shouldn't be drinking. So I'm gonna make it work. But once again, let me put my little circle light on. I wonder why it was so dark up in here. That helps out a little bit. Are you energized, but I appreciate you. Yeah, I usually try to come with the energy. uh, come on up. Because I ain't got that many slides. So come on up and we can hit the questions while I go through it. I'll drop the link again. You know, AWS is my thing. So come on up. And anybody else want to come on up? Come on up. I dropped the stream there. You can ask your questions in the chat, or you can come on up. You don't have to put on your camera, but you can come on up too, and we can chop it on up. So let's get started. So once again, AWS and this 800-53 compliance. So certain regions, which are certain data centers in those regions, are FedRAMP actually certified and validated. They have 3PAOs that comes in and actually do their assessments for them at a big time level. So I put those regions that are FedRAMP certified, AWS Gov Cloud United States region. You said West one and East one. I think each one of those regions has between 3 and 6 data centers in it. So it'll be US dash one, A, B, C, and D. So you can do failover between those data centers. Those data centers, I think, between 75 and 150 miles apart. And two, they have separate power companies, electric companies. So if one of them gets hit or cut, they're not going to affect the other data centers. And the commercial side, which is cool, is you can do US East, North Virginia, US East Ohio. I usually run all my stuff out of Ohio. Most people know I'm from Indiana in the Midwest, and Oregon. So you want to be specific on what region you are, so you can make sure that region is FedRAMP. And FedRAMP is basically NIST 800-53 in the cloud. That's how it's been certified by 3PAOs. What's going on, Chris?
So demanding, just forcing people up on the stage. No.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's straight facts. You definitely recall that really well with the 150-mile radius. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I have a whole list of different questions regarding GRC and cloud in particular. Okay. So, like, one of the big things that I was going to note, especially with AWS, what tools are we looking at from the GRC perspective? Like I've heard of guard duty, but what are some of the different key features like when we make an account on AWS for GRC?
That's an excellent question. I didn't put them on any slides. I'll look them up real quick. I would go Security Hub, AWS config. I'll bring them up. AWS config. You can pick your compliance, and it's going to tell if you're compliant. You can pick NIST, CMMC. I actually meant to take a screenshot. Now for that, like you said, guard duty. It's going to do your vulnerability scans. For guard duty is Macy. Macy's going to do your on your S3 bucket. If you're trying to send out sensitive information, Macy will block it if it sees an SSN or something, because that tells Macy it's not encrypted. Let me bring up that AWS Security Hub. That's going to be my next video. Like you just said, what are really the compliant services you should be using in AWS? Come on, Bing.
Yeah, and also B-Dub says, yeah, he still got you on camera, Chris Whitlock. Yeah. It's my turn to make PBO work rather than the other way around.
Yeah. So let me look up. Go ahead.
Yeah, like you already listed out some of the other tools that I didn't even know about. I've heard of Security Hub and AWS config, but I was only really aware on guard duty being a primary.
Up a little bit. Go ahead and recite that real quick.
I was just saying that I knew about guard duty itself, and that was my understanding as a primary. I didn't realize that AWS config and Security Hub would closely coincide.
Oh, they have like 3 or 4. Where is that? Let's see. Somebody else just pinged me. I think that's my man B2B. Now that's Jupiter. What's up, Jupiter?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So speaking of which, so I just started my new job this Monday. Pretty much Kagan Shield is a drone company. I can't get into too much detail because they work with the government, but so by me going from a big large defense company coming to a smaller company, I'm going to have to get on the speed with the cloud base right now, because it's like, whoa, it's the same parameters, but it's the different compliance and stuff. So I have to follow a compliance sheet while it's using Nessus. So yeah. Oh man, this company is chill, dude.
That's
But
cool,
we
man.
still got it, but at the end of the day, I can't speak too much, as a drone company, because now drones are the thing now. So yeah.
Yeah, I had a sheet with those on those. Let me keep going my slide. I think this is it. That's it. Yep, here it goes. Can I make that bigger? Here, let me.
Look at you struggle streaming PBO.
Yeah, I just went and found an actual image, and I'll just add it to my slides real quick. You just do it on the fly, man. I've been doing this forever.
That was my first question, was in regards to the different tools that we should be looking at, because you can go through and you can make a free account on AWS, and that's great. But if you don't know what you're looking for, then...
And it took me ever to figure that out, now that you mentioned that. Because AWS has a ton of services, which is good and bad. They usually have everything you're looking for. Can you see my screen, Chris?
Yes.
So let's start at the top. I'm trying to figure out data protection side, Amazon Macy's, Cloud HMs, which is keys, certificate authority, KMS's keys, certificate manager, secret managers, where you can put your passwords so you don't have to hard code them in a program. Security Hub app. It's an old screen. This is older. AWS organization is the best of breed, how you should set it up. So it'll set up your accounts for GRC, your accounts for developments, your accounts for security. Control Tower actually sets up guardrails around those, meaning you could say it has to be in 14 characters. You got to have encryption with keys. Artifacts is where you would put your documents for PCI, SOC 2, Type 2, that you can pull it down. And audit managers, when you scan their Security Hub. Okay, detection is So AWS config, you could pick your compliance standards, scan your infrastructure. AWS Cloud Trail is where you log your APIs. AWS Inspector and Detective. One of them is your compliance scan, and the other one's your vulnerability scan. Guard Duty, Security Hub. The Security Lake is all of those logs and all of your logs on prem. You can put them up in Security Lake, and that'll be your Splunk like SIM that you could use. So that's it at a high level. So, and I think I've done videos on each one of those, Chris, but you're right. It's a lot of things you need to learn. I would start with Security Hub, and that is the painted class. Security Hub will call your Amazon Inspector, your Detective, and your Macy's, and all those findings will go up to your Security Hub.
And they couldn't just consolidate this down to like 5 tools?
Well, yeah. What I would start off with would be, let me think about that.
Yeah, so that's going to be your video for next week is, you know, the
I
go-to tools.
I probably would go Security Hub, Detective, because that'll be your vulnerability. And of course, AWS config, because then I could pick NIST, CMC, point it to my EC2, my Windows, and it'll give me a compliance scan on it. So from a GRC, that's what I would do. The lake and SIM, all that could be set up by infrastructure and logging it. I don't know if that would actually fall, to be honest, to fall under GRC. If we got hacked, of course, we would have to look in the logs, but that I wouldn't think that's part of it. So I'll do that, set that up for next week. What would be the common tools to start GRC, and hopefully I was labbing a little bit today, so hopefully I can lab Security Hub a little bit. So let me go to the next slide real quick. That was an excellent question. Shout out to Jim R. Thanks for joining. You had any comments on that, Jim R, while we flowing through?
No, sir. Just plug it in here.
Oh, it's all good. So the other thing, AWS, is your services. There's a list of services, and it'll tell you if it's NIST 800-53 or FedRep compliant. So when you work with your architecture, your CTO, we about to look at some common architectural diagrams. I take those architectural diagrams, take those services, and look those up to make sure they're NIST 800-53 compliant. So a lot of times they get frustrated when I tell them we can't use that because it's not in the list, right? So that's one thing I think from a third-party assessment. How do you make sure the services they're using are valid services that they should be using? So see what's in there. Bretsy's in the house. Thanks for joining. I'm here too, Justin. When I learned AWS first, when I do Azure, I use that's what I do too. I'm actually still learning AWS. I haven't went to Azure, but that's going to be my thing. I do some high-level Azure assessments, and like you said, I kind of map them back and forth.
Yeah, and does this still apply? Does some of this applies to VMs too? Because oh yeah, because now like I said, now defense companies are, or I wouldn't say, well, I don't know about defense companies. I haven't been there in a while, but these small startup companies, like they are doing a lot of cloud-based and VMs, and yeah, VMs are awesome. It's like, hey, you get bang for your buck with VMs. You can do so much with VMs.
Yeah, Amazon EC2 being Windows, or Amazon Linux, which is a fork of Red Hat. Those are really just VMs and running in the cloud. So the cool thing is you can SSH in there and just move around. I was looking at some Apache VMs this morning while I was labbing, looking up a Apache web server. So now, what we're looking at is the standard architecture for serverless for AWS. So when you see those AWS Lambdas, that could be PHP or Java or whatever running in the cloud. So basically, when you come in from the client, you go through the API, you hit this microservice, it pulls it from DynamoDB, which is the database. Then it comes back and shows it to the client. Amazon Cognito is where they put their users at, their passwords, or you can actually use LinkedIn or Facebook to do authentication. CloudFront up there is the CDN. Basically, if you go and you look at a video, it'll put it in the CloudFront. So the next user, if it's looking for that particular video, it doesn't need to pull it from the Amazon database or S3 bucket. You can just pull it from the cloud CDN, and those CDNs are close to the customers. They really around the world. You could be running in Cali, put a CDN in Ohio. If that data is cached in that cloud front, it'll pull it there and the user get it ASAP. Route 53 is just a DNS service that you map to your domain name, right, and get that back. Certificate manager, right, if you're doing your standard certificate for SSL, you pull it from there. The KMS will be your data encryption for at-rest certificate. So that's kind of in a high level for a serverless architecture. Once again, if you're a security architect, or a lot of times if you do GRC and you validating and doing assessments on people web applications or what they're developing, it's kind of nice to know different architecture that are standard, right? So you can say this is best of breed for AWS. So we're gonna look at a quick 3 of those. So that's the serverless that everybody's using. They won't have the come. This is the old standard 3-tier architecture where you have a web server, app server, and a database. The difference is if I got an Apache web server, I gotta manage the hardware and software underneath that runs that server. On the other one, where you see AWS Lambda, you put your code in there, and Amazon's gonna take care of your hardware underneath there. So when it hits your function, it's gonna spit up an EC2 or a Windows underneath your code, run it. Then once it's done, so Amazon's responsible for hardware. In the old 3-tier, this web server, you got to build it, patch it, and care and feed it, right, on both the web server and application server. Then the next one is, which I'm hoping to do in June, is Kubernetes and Docker. Everybody's doing containers, right? So this is the standard AWS architecture if you're doing containers. It seems like Kubernetes, the hot container right now. So it shows you at the private subnet running Kubernetes and what would that look like in your architecture. So those are 3 standard architecture I see 90% of the time when I'm doing third-party assessments. Is either 3-tier, serverless, or containers. Containers are becoming hot. A lot of people want to use containers, manage containers. It's complicated, but once again, I start seeing a lot more Kubernetes. And I'm actually pretty weak on containers, so that's one thing I'm trying to spin up. And we just talked about running those services on that site that we looked at earlier. These are the services underneath. So you can see if S3, you can see that that's FedRAMP moderate on East and West. You can run it in FedRAMP high. So any service they're using, like we saw Kubernetes, S3, workflow, I would just come in and once again, Amazon RDS for SQL Server. I will come in and make sure their service is FedRAMP for the data center we want to be in. So that once you have the service be NIST compliant or FedRAMP compliant and the data center compliant, you're 80% of the way there, right? Now we're talking about when different services talk to what, it has to be encrypted. You got to encrypt the data and the rest. So how they configure it. But if it's on this list and it's in the right data center, once again, you're 80% of the way there. Go ahead, Chris. You got a couple more questions while I'm rolling through?
Oh, yeah. Like I said, I'm glad that you're doing these late night streams, for the 3 hours ongoing. So that first question was in regards to what tools should we look out for. Mm-hmm. One of the other key things that I was going to ask is, so there's a lot of these small and medium businesses that are breaking into the cloud. Mm-hmm. And that's partially why I was curious about what tool usage would be required. But also, like, it seems the assessment would be way more complicated because really when you're looking at like a cloud environment, you're really like auditing the actual a SaaS application is what it kind of comes down to an extent when you're looking at the platform itself, right?
Yeah, but the cool thing, especially in AWS and Azure, I can ask them their stack and I can go look it up on this list. And a lot of times if you're a small company, I'm gonna tell you if it's not on this list, you can't use it. So, right. So then that, for me, that cuts down half the battle. Because usually if they're coming to me, they're trying to do some federal work or some state work. So I'm saying these are the services you need to do to become compliant because you don't have the infrastructure or money to do a heavy lift. So let's try to make it easy as possible.
So then if that's the case, is there a situation where you can actually like export the configuration and do a comparison against a compliance check? Like
I
kind
would,
of like with Stigs?
yeah, I would do that AW, and we'll look at it in a second. I'll pull it up. AWS config, you can load your compliance being Stig or CMC, pointed to that architecture, and it'll run through there and give you findings. And that's what I'm a lab probably win in 2 weeks. So that'll tell you what's not configured properly, have a finding, and what you need to do to fix it, or if we need to do a mitigating control.
But
But
doesn't that cost money?
yeah, it's pretty cheap though. It's cheap. It's cheap. They were like
Gotta
100,000
fight for
scan.
budget.
Yeah, theirs was like 100,000 scans, or like $4. And you can kind of cheat a lot of times if you have multiple web servers. You're gonna make an image so all the web servers the same. We can spin up that image because it's standard and just scan that image. We don't need to scan the if we have 20, like you said, BMs or EC2s. We could just do the gold image, and we know they're all made off of that image. So we can build that off in the compliance subnet and just scan it all there. So it'd only be like 4 or 5 things, not the 200 or 300 we would have if we were a big company. I worked at a state agency. I think we had 70 VM spinning up for tax season. It was something crazy like that. We had like 125 app servers. So you don't need to scan all that if they're done from an image and you have your gold image.
Yeah.
Jupiter, you
That
got
makes
anything
sense.
to chime in on that, Jupiter? You want any of that? Oh,
Nah.
all right, Jupiter, you at work or something? Shout out to Jupiter. A lot of noise in the background. Go ahead, Jim R. You want any of that?
No, no, I'm with you. Just scan the gold disk or the image, and just to ensure you've got good patch management and configuration management, and you're good to go. You won't end up in
Yeah.
jail.
Yeah, and what we do is to make sure nobody's sleeping them in a broken image. Maybe once a quarter we'll scan the whole infrastructure. Because a lot of times I have developer have to put some in production. They didn't document it right, and maybe we didn't get an image. So maybe once a quarter, every 6 months, then we can go slap them about the hand because they didn't put it back in the gold image. So
Yeah.
maybe
Nah,
once a
I'm just
quarter.
getting my grub in. I'm sorry, sir.
Nah, you good? Just go on mute. You good? I'm over here eating salad, trying to get skinny, trying to get my summer body going on. Shout out
Yeah,
to me.
yeah. In PBO, if it's like me, typically you'll work these scans in when there's some type of compliance requirements, and then you'll kind of do your due diligence on them.
Yeah. Yeah, when we're doing big changes, or a lot of times if the developers are putting a big change in, once they get their change in, we'll scan it in development. But once they get in production, to make sure it matches development like they said it does, we'll do a scan. Once again, if we're doing a big production build, a lot of times, hopefully, you're stable and you just in maintenance mode. So to cut a lot of that out. But yeah, Chris. So those are all the services you see right there. So once again, I checked it. We looked at those architectures. So I'm hoping if they're doing this, I can push them. Let me find that.
So in other words, what you're saying is that you could walk me through the steps on doing the that edge computing that we looked at before, that thin client,
Yeah.
and apply the FedRAMP.
Yes.
To it.
Yes. Yes.
Well, there's a lab we could do in a live stream right there, PBO. We'll schedule that one after next week's. See, we already got the next 2 videos planned.
Oh, we'll see. I gotta squeeze those in there. I gotta get that course done. But once again, here's the serverless basic architecture, best of breed for AWS. This is the standard 3-tier, which is the old model I've done my whole life. Then now here's the containers with Kubernetes nodes. So that's how I think everybody's going to Kubernetes. So let's keep going. Those are all the services. Once again, you see in the FedRAMP East and West. We were looking at those data centers. What services should be used in there that's already been validated by 3PAO from the big guys, right? So once you get their validation, those services are good. Then 2 is, it was weird when I looked in there. I didn't see S3. I see S3 Glacier, so I was surprised I didn't see S3 Bucket. So I put it in Chat GPT. Chat GPT said standard AWS 3 bucket is FedRAMP certified. These are the data centers, the one we were just looked at. S3 is moderate, but in Virginia, you can actually make it be high. It has an AWS FedRAMP compliance package, and it's also in the FedRAMP marketplace where you can get those packages. So a lot of times, once again, if I was looking for a service that I didn't see in here, I would hit it in Chat GPT. Then once I did that, ChatGPT said I could go on the FedRAMP compliance page, which I thought was this page that I was looking on, but it's not there. But once again, you want to go through each one of the services that their company's using, or if a third party's coming in, you want their architecture so you can look up stuff to make sure they configure it properly. Then here is the AWS Marketplace. I can actually go buy a hardened Microsoft Windows Server 2019 or 2022, meaning I can buy a VM that's already set up properly, that's been validated. From the CIS hardening, there has sticks. I'm a Linux guy, so I would CIS hardening level 1, Amazon Linux 2. This is $2 cents an hour, or probably $165 a year for a VM, and it will save 69% if you pay up a year up front. So a lot of times you can just buy pre-hardened VMs that's already passed the assessment test, right? So you don't have to build it yourself, right? There's certain hardenings and checks. So a lot of times I tell people, just go buy it, right? Then this vendor will work with you. If your application breaks it, what do you need to take off? A lot of times you can get some consulting works for them pretty cheap if you're going to buy a couple VMs and run it from a year. But once again, $165 if you pay up front for 69% of it. I'm sure they didn't show the size of it, because depending on the size and the networking traffic, right, it's going to make that a little more expensive. But once again, you go to Marketplace and pay up front for your VMs and get that technology for you. That's really all I had. Keep going, Chris. What questions did you have?
Well, in direct regard to this, so I've seen the different images that are also available on there, but also, like, why would I go through and pay for an image for that when, like it says right there, you actually have to pay them a fee to utilize that image? Why wouldn't I just go through and do my own EC2 and then apply the hardening myself?
You're not a Dr. Smee, young man, so you want to take that risk. You're gonna F it up and get your company and be negligible for it. But
I just grab a script off of GitHub.
Yeah, you're gonna trust those yahoos on GitHub. But no, that actually is an excellent decision. My more mature customers, they want to manage that to a tip. If you 3 dudes in a garage trying to get a government contract, I think you need to buy it off a marketplace, right? So it depends on the maturity of your staff, because a lot of people have business requirements. They're not really a tech company. Their business requirement sits on tech, but they be having 2 dudes in a garage and they're barely making it. So I tell them, just buy their stuff, load it up in the right region, load it up with the right services, and the OS stuff, just buy it off a marketplace.
So now in regards to that, the hardening process, so if I'm paying for that image on a monthly or annual basis, then who's at fault when it gets breached?
You.
Yeah, because of the shared responsibility model.
Yeah, and yeah,
it's still my fault.
I mean, you can theoretically it would be their fault, but they got lawyers, man. They're not, ain't nobody gonna sign up. But the thing I think you could have over them, if it was something super negligible that they should. A lot of times too is the crazy part is CIS and STIG. You're gonna actually have to loosen it up to make it run if you got an application running on it. And that's the part they're gonna blame you, because you're gonna have to take a couple of those controls off.
And yeah, CyberCycle. Yeah, it was somewhat of a rhetorical question there, just because like I've looked at some of the different images that Amazon has, and like some of that stuff is actually insanely expensive for open source tools.
Facts.
Yeah, it's just kind of unfortunate. And so, yeah, it just really speeds up the process, and it's a verified image and so forth, but still.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine if does that auto update as well?
Yeah, you could cut the patching on, but then you got to be careful, because probably what you have to loosen up to run your app, if you just blindly patch it, it's probably going to break your app, depending on what you're running on. Justin, I just don't see Google a lot inside the government space. There's my guy I work with on LinkedIn that's doing a little CMC. He actually had a Google expert come in and they talk about the Google workspace. I don't see Google running in the Fed space very often.
Yeah, because Google is compromised to a certain degree.
Okay.
I've got a friend who's a platform architect, but I never see it even since I've been here for the last 7 or 8 years on a commercial side. I don't see it very often, so I just put it on my mind. I just don't have time for it.
Yeah, I don't know, Justin. You might see it more than me. I've never seen Google at DoD. I've been in there for a while. I worked in large state agencies. They never run Google. They run in hybrid cloud. It's usually Azure and Azure and AWS. I just don't see it. Good luck with that, man. Yeah, let's see. I'm late on there. Apply some. Oh, I love the sticks. Keep going, Chris. You got more. Shout out to my man Mike V for joining me. Once again, my apologies for sleeping through. I was supposed to get with them on a live. I fell asleep. I tried to get a nap in. I'm demonetized for a little bit. I'm gonna get the barbecue fun back going. Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
Yeah, so like another barrier that I can see with businesses going into the cloud as well is getting their policies and procedures up to date with the cloud itself, because there's some special things that coincide with that too. Is there any type of assistance through AWS for that, or standards, anything out there to assist in that process?
Actually, it's the other way around. People I see try to use AWS. Then when I ask for NIST stuff, they download AWS and sends me their NIST policies and procedures. But once again, that's only half of them, right? Because it's shared responsibility. So I actually see the opposite. Oh, we're using AWS. I'm like, AWS is not talking about configuring your app. AWS is not talking about what keys you're using and how you're using. So I actually get the opposite problem. They think if they're in AWS or Azure, they're good. So for me, I have the opposite problem with that, especially because AWS sells you on that, which they're great at. They got policy, procedures, PCI, SOC 2, 3s, 9s. They got all the documentation, right?
Yeah, I'm with you, PBO. Yeah, I knock out those policies and standards regardless of what we're using, what the platform, etc. And likewise, what's your control framework, everything, and then it's like, okay, because if you get on Azure or whatnot, okay, click it, now we're compliant, etc. Yeah, you got to start with the policies and standards and control frameworks and architecture first.
Yeah, but most small companies, they got some kind of ideas and they're trying to jump in. Yeah, my thought about that, Justin. You're right. Most small business and medium-sized business I work with, they're trying to get government work so that they don't use Google because they know Google's not accepted in the government. But once again, I'm doing NIST and 800 and DoD, and I see a lot of young guys trying to get I thought I heard somebody come up. Maybe that was there it is. Fairy Pen.
Hey, I know.
Yes, so that's usually what I see from that particular point of view. Shout out to Mike V. Yep.
Hey, I know a lot of companies like that. They get breached and they're calling for help.
That's it, man. I tell them solution architect, facts. That might be my next goal. Get on that solution. Go ahead, Farron Perry. You want to chime in on something? Welcome to the panel. Let me drop the link.
Y'all can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead. We can hear you, Farron Perry. Chime in. Maybe we can't hear you now. We hear the thing moving. I think you faded out real quick. Hold on, Farron Perry. Go ahead, Chris. You got one more question while we're rolling?
Yeah. So one of the other questions that I was going to bring up too is change management.
Mm-hmm.
So is that another one of those tools that are built in there? Like you had that diagram up with all of those different tools.
Yeah. They have configuration management tools built in, because when you build your gold image, you would build your EC2 image, then you would take a snapshot of that. Then, like you said, your hardening compliance, whatever that was, you would build that. That actually would be CloudFormation, which is a YAML file that you would use to build your VPCs, your subnets. So you would put those things in a configuration file. So when you talk about your gold configuration, all that together is your configuration.
So you're saying that I do have to learn YAML?
Yes and no. The reason I pause is if you build an architecture, you can point CloudFormation, it'll build the YAML for you. So you can kind of cheat with the CloudFormation.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jupiter.
Oh, I'm sorry. So, for your smaller companies, like my company that's trying to get more government contractors, a lot of them are having our information. And say if they're a startup or doing some projects and they're trying to get the government, a lot of them want to be operating on those CUI.
Oh
No,
yeah.
you know what I'm talking about? CUI,
Oh,
controlled
yeah.
unclassified.
Yeah.
It's not classified, but it still has that classified and sensitive information.
Mm-hmm.
So right now they go through their frameworks and their, whether it's in the cloud, and they have to follow these policies and these defensive layers and policies. So.
But yeah, now that makes sense. Then two is from a development part, using GitHub or AWS version of GitHub. So you checking that in on the main branch. You got your versions you're gonna use to build your environment from a programmer standpoint. Then once again, you're gonna have infrastructure as code. So you're gonna have a couple of things. You could check them in on your own GitHub or your own personal. AWS has their version of GitHub, so you can check it all in that. Then two, you can have scripts build your environment from scratch off of your main branch. So that's how you would do configuration. So it's all good, fair and fair. It's all good. So once again, how you would handle that and how would you manage that? And once again, and we need to talk about that too from a high level. A lot of people do configuration management using different software, multiple softwares. I try to use the AWS native stuff, but a lot of companies already have pre-built versioning controls software they're using and how that works. So,
yep, and like I said, and I'm just circling back to the companies like are trying to get government contracts where there's a lot of frame like a control because they go through steps and stuff. I just can't think of stuff. They go through steps and levels to get that big contract to where it's like ding, like, hey, you guys are officially everything you have. It's no longer CUI. It is all classified now. So shoot, bottom line.
But too, those assessments are brutal sometimes.
I know, yeah. And dude, that's what I'm seeing. I was like, man, because we are starting from scratch, and I'm just like, wow. I mean, they have the processes and controls, and the access control. And what's awesome is like they do a lot of multi-factor authentication. I was like, oh, well, that's pretty good right there, Drew.
Yeah, but yeah, so doing it from scratch. The first time I was at DOD, we had 10,000 findings. It was crazy.
Yeah.
But go ahead, Chris, keep running through your list, man.
Oh yeah. So yeah, there was the change management aspect, but yeah, it just seems like such a barrier. I think that there's a lot of advantages to the cloud, and it could actually make it easier if it's done properly. But I mean, it's a scary step to take. So I was just trying to learn a little bit more in regards to that. But I mean, I'm really looking forward to your live stream labs when you get around to that.
Yeah, I'm getting there. I was laughing a little bit. To be honest, though, I used to, and I'm just kind of changing over the last 5 years. To me, the cloud gives you pre-built stuff. There's a lot of videos to help you set up in the cloud, and AWS and Azure gives you best of breed. So they kind of say this is the best of breed of how you should do it. Because a lot of times you're on prem, you don't know what best of breed is. You don't really, you just kind of wing it in. AWS and Azure says this is what we recommend you do for this type of work, and this is the architecture. Here's the best of breed we think you should do. And a lot of times they tell you this is certified the way the government would do it. So that's why I think that the cloud is, well, once again, I've been doing it forever. So for me, when I talk to small companies and I do consulting work, which I haven't done a couple things in the 2 years, that's what I help them with, right? These are the services you should be using. You doing this on prem, if you go on the cloud, this is a easily lift and shift to go to the cloud. This is what you need from encryption. This is how you need to do the queues. This is how you need to keep all your traffic inside your tenant so it doesn't go on the internet, right? You should keep your traffic between your services local, not government. But once again, when we do that AWS config lab, it scans and tells you for NIST, this is how you need to configure it.
Mm-hmm. So really what you're saying is everybody should just go to the cloud.
Unless you not doing nuclear codes, yeah, I think you should go to the cloud. Because too, it ends up being cheaper. Because by the time you try to set up some VMs, or if you grow, you won't have VMs. If you have to build them, you have to buy that server. Like people don't know, pets.com, probably before your time, she spent $10 million of hardware just during Christmas because she got 80% of her orders during Christmas. After Christmas left, she had $80 million worth of hardware she couldn't use. And that's really how that's how Amazon started AWS. Their Christmas was so big, they had leftover hardware and services. One guy thought, let's rent this out to people because we don't need it during Christmas. So that's actually how AWS started.
Then another thing is, and I'm just looking with cloud, it creates a sense of redundancy at the same time. It's like, and it creates less overhead because I'm like, if I don't have to rely on servers a whole lot, and then especially with staff, like, because it's a lot of that overhead costs, and like you have to do more tedious digging into this, doing these controls. And I don't know, I'm gradually learning cloud right now. Pretty soon, the AI is going to be doing most of your configuration, your generations, and just for conmon or continuing mon, where you like, okay, just punch the control and are these standards are met? Did it type it in? Oh, we'll do it for you. Did it? And all you had to do is just do a weekly look at it. That's all you have to, or monthly, how it is. Because Chat GPT is already coming about too.
Yeah. So that for me, that makes it just a lot easier. Once again, if you need hardware, if you need 20 servers this weekend, you spin them up, and when you don't need them, it just takes them away. You got auto scaling, and it takes DR. I don't have to build a whole nother data center for DR. I just spin up DR in another region.
Yep. Mirror it.
Yeah, so then what I'm basically hearing then is all of these companies that are getting breached that are in the cloud already are just doing it wrong.
Yes, we walked through Snowflake. They didn't have MFA. You talking about Ticketmaster, $1 billion company, wasn't doing MFA. Right? We had a great walkthrough for that, right? We had a great incident response post-mortem on that. They didn't set up MFA. $1 billion company wasn't doing MFA on the database even. That's okay. On the database. So let you know, I don't even know what to say to that, man. I'm on my soapbox. Yeah, they're not. $1 billion company didn't have MFA on. Ticketmaster's $1 billion company. And we went through the document. They showed 10 easy checks to lock it down. Ticketmaster didn't do any of that stuff. And they had MFA in red or yellow when we looked at that document. It was highly, highly recommended. And they just blew it off. So they I'm on my soapbox. Most companies don't take security serious.
Hey, PBO. Like I was telling PBO before, it's like I deal with some of the smaller non-healthcare entities, nonprofits and not-for-profits these days, and man, they roll the dice. HIPAA compliance, they're treating patients, and a lot of them, it's a hard choice, and a lot of them, what is the term? It's the wild west in a lot of these smaller organizations.
The sad thing though is, if you look at AWS, their services are usually cheaper than you doing on-prem. So it's just you really just don't care, to be honest. I mean, AWS, they lower prices a lot of times because they're gonna get it on volume.
Oh, I got to tell you, it's a lot of times who they bring in or the compliance or auditing aspect. It comes through the CFO, and they're really have a close ties with people like Ernst & Young and PwC and KPMG, and their cyber guys are coming in, so it's costing $900,000 plus an hour. So that's a lot of the problem. And then when it hits the IT guys, it's like, man, they don't have money for this stuff.
Fact. Ticketmaster was a couple hours kind of worked, but they were challenging. Fact. CyberSecurity. So yeah, Chris, most of them just, I mean, most breaches we looked at, and most breaches OSHA goes over, they're doing something super negligent that should be an easy fix. Once again, Snowflake, Ticketmaster was $1 billion company and didn't do basic stuff for that. And if they would have done that, they wouldn't have got breached.
Yeah, and like I get that part of it as well, but there's like so many different ways in as well. So, even just not even having like your code reviewed or otherwise, they could dump your database or whatever else. And of course, that's the responsibility on the business itself.
Right. You should be encrypting your database. So if somebody dumps your database without the keys, they can't read it.
Yeah.
Right. So once again, that's their shared responsibility. Those businesses, for me, aren't doing basic stuff. And once again, if you go through AWS config and I bring it up, it tells you what to set to be compliant. So you don't need to guess. But two, I've done reviews and people push back. We don't need to do that, or that's too costly, or that's too complicated. I'm like, well, are you doing it on prem? No, we're not doing it on prem either. So I'm like, okay. Well, that's the risk. And like we talked about, that's the risk. Do your business want to accept it or not? PBO gonna go take a nap. PO. So keep going, Chris. You got some more?
Oh yeah. Did you want to go through and start setting this up for Study GRC?
That's a no.
For the Docker. Sign in right now. Screen share.
That's actually Kubernetes. Y'all running Docker. I need to get the Docker checked. Keep going, Chris. Keep going. I know you said a few questions.
Yeah, I mean that pretty much covers the majority of the questions that I had there. I mean, I've looked around in AWS a little bit and so forth. I do prefer it over Azure. I didn't realize all of those different services that they had in regards to GRC itself.
Yeah, they got.
But I think that just overly complicates it because it's
no. I think what it is, it's like once you learn it, you have different levels of stuff you can use. They give you a ton of stuff. Then once again, the maturity level of your company depends on what you should use, right? So I think they give, but once again, like you said, it's a lot on you, so you got to figure out what to use. But they give you a plethora of tools. Once again, I keep feeling like somebody's trying to come up. I keep ready to beat. So once again, you got to just do the right tool for the right job, right? And the cool thing is they give you a lot of tools. You just got to figure out the right one, right? It's one of those things. I'd rather have it than not need it than need it and not have it, right? So one of those standard things. So for me, and two, though, once I got a plethora of certifications, and me, I'm trying to get back into it myself.
Well, and I don't know if you've played around with Lightsail at all, but I don't believe the majority of this even would work with Lightsail.
It would not, because Lightsail is prepackaged, but Lightsail is kind of the baby step. Then when you go into the more, like we were looking at the more standard architectures, which is a bigger step, then you get to use those tools in your presentation. But you see it, but once again, you got a plethora of tools. You just got to figure out what to use the right one. But you can start off with AWS organization. It's going to give you what accounts to use. Then inside there, AWS KMS is going to tell you what keys to use for encryption. AWS certification managers, your TLS certificates. So you can just pick what you want and build into it, right? Once again, you don't want to take it all in. You just want to use the things you need and kind of build into it. Then when you need to have users and go out and look for threat model IPs, Amazon Cognito will do that for you. So they give you AIM, right? Identity Access Management, Identity Center if you want to do SSOs. So they just give you, just got to become comfortable with those different tools. When you're ready
for, learn all of these tools, and then I should be good to go.
No. You just got to figure out, like we talked about, you just got to figure out the three you need. Then you just keep making them more secure. But now I agree, there's a lot to learn in those tools, and sometimes I get them confused. I'm like, okay, now expector or detective, what? Okay, but no, but once again, and two is that's kind of what we're gonna build up. And the GRC ports we're talking about, and I'm just going to start labbing. So, like you talked about, when to use what, and when is it time to use what, and what is it used for? So, let me, if I can find this quick conformance pack, then I'll call that a night. Let's see.
Whoa, PBO, we're only coming up to an hour.
No, PBO tired from the Dr. Holder this morning, but I feel you. Is that it? Yeah. Let me share my screen. Stop sharing. And we were talking about AWS config. This is AWS config. And a lot of times I was working on an assignment, they were building something. So I just went through here and pulled out the checks for application load balancer checks for, this is for 1075, of course, IRS work. So too, I could give these checks to the developer, to the infrastructure, to the cloud engineering guys, right? Or to the compliance guy, and it tells them what checks they need to do, right? So I can export this out in a spreadsheet. Then if I'm using S3 bucket, here's the S3 checks, right? Server-side encryption, default KMS keys, SageMaker. If I'm using AI or machine learning, that's SageMaker. So it kind of AIM using MFA enabled. So it tells you the checks. So these are the checks I can give to the different teams so they know what to do, right? So, and two is that's just learning, getting better at your craft, and just kind of growing. And those stuff we talked about. Those are the stuff I'm gonna put in the course, right? Too. So this is kind of FedRAMP in the cloud. If you're doing FedRAMP in the cloud, what are the checks you would do if you're doing S3 bucket? If you're doing a VPC, if you're doing an AIM, you need MFA. So what checks and how should they be configured? For 1075, FedRAMP, CMC, so they have different compliances. If you see to the left, I think they have 50 compliances in there. Let me make that a little bigger. I can barely see it. So let's see if that's a little better. I'm getting people. Yes.
Well, I mean, CISO Assistant has over 70 different types of compliance. So what if there's something that they don't have that I want?
Who, CISO or AWS?
In AWS.
You can these conformance packs. You can add your additional checks to them. So if you want to have something unique that's at a higher level than CMC or 1075, or two, you could take these two and put them together. Because when we used to do DOD and IRS Pub 275, my boss used to be, he's ex-NSA, so he wanted to do the stick. So we put those together, and I hate this word, we harmonize those two to pick the most stringent things before we run those out. So now you can always add your own checks to these. If there's something from CISO Assistance, or you saying, well, this is HIPAA high, and I want to put it in my IRS, you can just add that check in there. You can use your YAML skills. Use your YAML skills.
You mean ChatGPT skills.
Yeah, use your chat. But yeah, so now you can customize these. A lot of times you can put multiple ones in there to see how you fare 1075 for CMC versus FedRAMP. HIPAA high trust is in there too. What's up? What you gonna say, Justin? I want to say one thing. Are you trying to come up? Go ahead, Justin. I want to say one thing. Okay, that's great. I don't know which one was a great idea. Yamo Dabba. Okay, Yamo Dabba do. Yeah, shout out to the Yamo. You got any more, Chris?
I mean, you want to cut it early, so I
mean.
No,
keep going. We good. We good. We good.
Yeah, no, I mean, you've already really answered the questions there. So I was just looking for the tool usage, and then we added a couple other things there, such as with the images and so forth. Yeah, I find it just overly complicated personally, but I mean, it was the same way when I was looking at the different compliance frameworks as well. So
yeah, for me, I hear what you're saying, but for me, that complexity, I think of as when I needed it to be there. But you're right, I got to untangle it to figure out where to start, right? And for me, that's what I'm going to do here and in the class, right? These are the things you need to start with. This is how you build them. This is 100 level. This is 200. This is a 300 level class. This is 400. Now we're trying to get our doctorate like Dr. Ozier, right? We're doing Kubernetes in the cloud, building off of YAML, and we're ready, right? So like you said, what do you need as a base starter kit? Right.
And especially with all of those different tools right there, all I'm seeing is dollar bill signs to AWS. If
most of those are cheap. Most of those are cheap as hell, and I'll make sure I talk about those in a bit.
Hey, Study GRC is a small nonprofit.
Most of those are pretty cheap to be, and let's be real, you get to use them for a year. Once you do once you do your first email, you get to use them for a year.
Yeah.
There's a few of them you get 30 days, a few of them you get 90 days. But for labbing, you can just spin it up, tear it down, create your cloud formation with the YAML, So when you run that, it'll build it all up where you left off. Run your labs, do what you need to do, and just tear it down. Then you can use spot instance, which means these instances are being used. We got extra. They just charge you 90% of 90. They charge you 90% less of what that EC2 or VM would cost. But if they need it in there for a bigger client, they're gonna take it. But I use spot instance, so that's costs 10% to lab. So,
bam! I really look forward to your live streamed, so I could learn something.
I got a ton of them out there, but I'll start again. I got a ton of AWS stuff where I talked about each service.
But that was like 2 years ago, PBO.
They haven't changed much, but I'll do it again. Let's see. Cloud. That's what the cool thing though is. I cut my budget on, so if it goes over $50 a month, I get an email. So
I'm thinking it might be cheaper for me to just get a $400 refurb server and self-host.
No, because there's so many services. You get 100 services you can play with. So, but I hear what you're saying. I actually started doing that when I was younger. But for me, it's cheaper in the cloud because when I do a lab, even a big lab with an Oracle database, in 2 days it might cost me $6. I use spot instances. I use a lot of free tier VMs. They got a lot of super small VMs that are free tier I use. So most of the stuff you use, you can, especially from the EC2s, you can use their free tiers with spot instances. And I just make sure when I'm done, I double check. I'm shutting down everything. Anything on charge me shutting down. So, but no, it's a learning curve. That's why those guys get paid. So, I mean, that's part of mastering the skill set. But like you said, it's a lot there. So that's my goal to get back into that. I kind of let that go, which wasn't very smart of me. But I'm grinding back up. But yeah, we start picking those out. I'll start picking out those GRCs, services, and start spinning those up. Security Hub, Guard Duty, Inspector, Macy's, really AWS organizations where you can do the service control panels. Service control policy, so you can block people from running stuff. So, but yeah, we can walk through that and just kind of build our skills up in that from really from an architectural standpoint and a GRC standpoint. So when I talk about those best of breed, or they call them well architecture things in AWS, I kind of know what people should be building before they building it. The string, that cousin of I love Zero Trust. I did shout out to Study GRC. I saw that came across my timeline. I didn't know we talked about Zero Trust on Study GRC.
You presented it.
I know. That came up. I was like, I shared it. I was like, oh, I forgot about that. But I got 800 videos, man. I be forgetting. That's not even in my 800. That's in your. I'm like, oh, I forgot we did that. Shout out to me. But yeah, and we're going to jump back into Zero Trust too with AWS to talk about how to set up Zero Trust in an AWS architecture from start to finish. But no, you're right, Chris. Yeah, we'll start drilling down into those and labbing those. So because I got to get back in the lab, and so I did some basic stuff: VPC, EC2, application load balancer today. So getting those up. But
Sounds
is that
like
up?
Plan. Thank you so much, PBO.
Oh, no problems.
Learning every day.
Trying to learn every day. Oh, did I cut everybody's name off? You got anything to chime in yet before I shut it down? I think everybody's working.
Good stuff, PBO. No, I'm like you. I'm tired.
All right, Jim. Thanks for joining me. Go ahead, Jupiter. Chime in.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm about to get off. A good evening, soldier.
I appreciate you coming up. Go ahead and give Chris Whitlock the last word from the Study GRC family. You got anything?
Yeah, just GRC Mafia.
I appreciate it. I'm still tired from Dr. Ozier today. We were scrambling a little bit, but it turned out well. I want to appreciate everybody for joining me. I'm out. Everybody have a great hump day. I need to get some work in tomorrow. I appreciate you. Thank brother doing good things everywhere as well. I appreciate it. Once again, thanks for everybody joining me. Thanks for joining me, Jim. I'm out. Everybody have a good night.